All right, Stephen Sadler. We've been talking about 9/11, and I'm now moving from my book, Money and Power, to John Farmer's book, The Ground Truth. John Farmer was one of the senior members of the 9/11 Commission, and he wrote a book after the 9/11 Commission report came out, telling everybody how he was misled and misinformed, that the government and the military didn't tell him all the truth. And so we're going back and looking at some of the things that most Americans don't realize. Back in July, just before 9/11, just a couple months before, Ken Williams of the FBI, for instance, sent a message to the terrorist units in Washington and the CIA, informing them an inordinate number of individuals of investigative interest, in other words, people on the terrorist tip-off list, were taking flight school training in the United States, including Hani Hanjour, so they knew of him early. And that he was concerned that bin Laden was sending terrorists to learn to fly airplanes, to fly them into buildings. And a lot of people don't realize that our government knew that. There's the sense that who'd ever guessed that a terrorist would fly an airplane into a building, but they knew that. Matter of fact, on August 25th, now we're talking about just about a month before 9/11, the FBI Criminal Investigation Unit wanted to start an investigation on one of the hijackers named Midhar, and he was turned down. By August 28th, he kept pushing to do an investigation on these guys, and the upper management kept telling him to stand down. They told him he was all spun up. His retort to being told to stand down by his superiors was, hey, I'm just trying to keep someone from taking a plane and slamming it into the World Trade Towers. Information that the CIA had on various terrorists, they repeatedly did not give to the FBI. They allowed them to enter, even people that they've been tracking, they allowed them to enter and go into the airports and get on the airplanes. These are people they've been tracking. And Americans don't realize this. The NSA had been tracking many of these terrorists in the United States, knew they were in the United States, and they not only didn't tell the FBI, they didn't even give any of this information to the 9/11 Commission to consider what we knew. Back in 2000, just so you know, NORAD had put together a plan to train. It was called Positive Force, where they were looking at a scenario of some terrorists hijacking an airplane and slamming it into the Pentagon. If you look at NORAD's training manual, they actually show the Twin Towers. They train in case a hijacker would slam into the Twin Towers. And on the day of 9/11, NORAD was already planning a training exercises, which was part of what created all the confusion. Now, we've heard these things from conspiracy theorists. Now we're actually hearing it from the people on the 9/11 Commission report themselves. Apparently, all this talk we heard our president say that President Bush at the time said, who would ever have imagined that an airplane would have hit the World Trade Towers. We heard that from Donald Rumsfeld, we heard it from Cheney, we heard it from Rice. All that are a part of the National Security Council, all that are privy to this information, so they weren't telling us the truth on television when they said, who would ever have imagined or planned for that? And when members of our military at NEAD's base and NORAD ended up sending fighters out, and by this time Langley didn't even send fighters out till after the second airplane hit, they were sent out over the Atlantic Ocean. They weren't sent to New York to defend, and that was done on purpose. So there was a deliberate attempt to keep the protection of these airplanes. It was like they were allowed to hit these buildings. It's very, very suspicious, even to people that don't believe in the conspiracy theories. So Farmer doesn't think that our government was involved, but he sure thought they were inadequate. And I think all Americans, all people of this world, need to be a little more careful what they believe from our news, because the news has not been reporting the truth. So there's two things we need to consider. One is that we were misled or very misinformed, and two, that our media is at the very center of misinforming us. We're not getting the truth. We're getting spin. We're getting propaganda.